Welcome to the Let's Talk podcast, inspired by Mesquite ISD's Leadership and Empowerment Team, or LED for short.
Our guests include educators, students, and community members sharing their experiences from their perspectives.
So let's have a real conversation about embracing our differences and finding common ground with your hosts, Dr. LaDonna Gully and Ted Madden.
Welcome, and thanks for listening to the Let's Talk podcast. Our guest today is a teacher who never thought he would be a teacher, and now he helps train first-year teachers. But before we get started, we should acknowledge the fact that we are now doing video.
Yes.
Something a little bit different, which is why we've got 3 GoPros set up. We're going to try to put our podcast out on video, so you can look for that if you listen to us and you want to try to see us as well. What do you think? You like the new format?
You know what? This is going to be really amazing. So it's going to be a brand new adventure for us, right?
Right.
Ted?
And LaDonna and I have a photo shoot after this, so that's why
Exactly.
it's not going to be like this
Yeah,
every week.
definitely won't be.
And we didn't give you the memo. Maybe you would have worn a suit if we would have told you.
Right?
Well, it's today for spring break, so I'm not sure.
Probably not. Well, let's get to it. Okay, my name is Ted Madden. I work in the communications department, and I'm a 47-year-old white man.
My name is Dr. LaDonna Gully. I am an African-American woman who is 51 years old and also the director of the Leadership and Empowerment Team.
My name is Eric Grant. I'm a 29-year-old white man, and I teach U.S. history at West Mesquite High School.
And right off the bat, since we are doing video this time, I want to acknowledge the fact that you kept your mask on. All of our guests, as we do,
Yes.
take the masks off for the podcast. So just explain why you're keeping it on.
I'm keeping my mask on because my wife has cystic fibrosis. It's a lung disease. So we've been at the highest of risk throughout this whole COVID pandemic. And so we've been really locked down, trying to make sure I can do everything I can to protect her because, I love her, want more years with her. And so, yeah.
Well, let's start with where I started the podcast. How does someone who never wanted to be a teacher not only become one, but then help train first-year educators?
So I went to Baylor University, Sycamore Bears. And my sophomore year when I was there, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life, as all great college kids do. But more importantly, I was trying to figure out what I was going to do that summer, like an internship. And my mom referenced this program that was going on at my church back home, back in Fort Worth. It's called Freedom Schools. I'd never heard of it, looked into it, applied for it, got the internship. And so Freedom Schools started in the 1960s, and it was created to be able to create that, help that equity gap with African Americans predominantly. So they flew us out to Tennessee, which is like the head of where Freedom Schools is. And so they did these trainings with us. That was the first time I'd ever done any kind of education work with kids. It was kids 4th grade to 6th grade. And also just kind of part of working with like African American community and learning about more about the civil rights culture. And so I'd say that's kind of where I got my first dip into education. Mm-hmm. I was a history major. When I graduated, tried to figure out, okay, graduated, that was great. Now what am I going to do? And trying to figure that out. It wasn't until then where I finally realized God's been trying to pin me down and say, hey, this is what I want you to do. You have a passion to work with the next generation and a passion to work with other people and to be able to show how history has transformed our culture and our society and whatnot. And so be able to have that impact for the next group. And so went and I applied, worked at Marlin for a year. Marlin's one of those random places between Waco and College Station. If you blink, you missed it. Had a really good experience there, and then was praying to come back up in the DFW area because my wife, she wasn't my wife at the time, she was the girlfriend at the time. This is where she was. She went to UTD, so then I was just trying to figure out how to get back up here. And then this guy named Emilio Durand, for some reason, hired me. So extremely thankful for him. Got me plugged in at Vanston Middle, and then was there until this year. Mm-hmm. So it's been a great journey. I love getting to be a teacher. It's definitely it's the career I never knew I wanted, but the one I love every day.
I love that. I think that's so great. And you mentioned that you really got your first learning with the Freedom. But say it again for me.
Freedom Schools.
Freedom Schools. Mm-hmm. And so when you were in Tennessee, I'm really curious, what did you learn there while you were there?
So I learned a lot. So the biggest thing, there's two big, huge takeaways that have stuck with me ever since. The first one was, it was the first time in my life I was in a room of thousands of people from across the country, because this is a national program. So I met people from California, New York, all over the place. And it was the first time I went and I looked around the room and I'm like, oh, there's like 20 or 30 white people in the room, and mainly African American. And so it gave me a whole new perspective of being a minority for the first time. And so it definitely opened my eyes of what that felt like, and how, how much you feel like you stand out in that situation. So that was one big one that really kind of stood with me, because I thought, oh, that was a week for me, but that's a lifetime for other people. And the other part was learning more. Like, I'm a history person, love it. It's why I study for like just for fun. I'm just that guy. I'm a nerd. And even with that, with the civil rights movement, I didn't know to the depth and the level that was shared to us that week that have stayed with me ever since. And I go, hey, there's a whole other side to history that I need to go and like pay attention to. And so now getting to teach civil rights to high schoolers, I get to bring that side. But more importantly, I bring that side to every topic that we go over.
Right.
Like I remember I went and I listened to the episode y'all were talking to the other history teacher a few episodes back.
Shanice O'Neill?
Yeah.
I believe that's
from
right.
North Mesquite?
Yes, that's right. And I was listening to how she was talking, like her and Daniel were talking about implementing that. And so that's one thing I think we've done really well at West Mesquite is throughout the whole time we go through, we're like, hey, whoa. There's the other side that's going on here, and trying to always make sure we highlight, just because someone's prosperous or the country is prosperous doesn't mean everyone's prosperous. And trying to always highlight that for our students to show them the whole story.
Now, when you walk in, you're a white guy teaching at a predominantly minority school. Do you know what the percentages are
Correct.
at West Mesquite?
So
for
they're
people?
really, I know is predominantly Hispanic.
Yes, that's right.
And then it's African American, and then it's kind of everything else. Am I right?
That's correct. We're about 70% Hispanic.
Yeah.
So growing up, or even through my teens and early 20s, people called me Opie, which dates me a little bit, but I got that all American white guy look. You kind of have that too. So again, you walk in here, I'm thinking you belong at Trinity Christian Academy in Addison, not at West Mesquite. So can you just talk about why it's so important for you to be where you are now?
Right. I definitely agree with that. So one thing with that, I think it's important for me because I get to be a voice to these students from this, especially over these past 4 years where it's been very evident, where there's been a lot more like rise of like white nationalism and white supremacy with this. And it's important for me to stand in front of them and say, as a white man that looks just like them, that's wrong, and this is why. I think it's important to make sure you're part of the voice. A lot of these books I've been reading over the past year, where it's like The Color Compromise, like Jemar Tisby, he was talking about the importance of, and also like, so you want to talk about race. I know the district's done a great job with that book. They go, you have to be an advocate. You have to stand up, especially as a white man, especially the way I look, because I have the classic look of the all-American white boy, where it's like, it's important for me to say, hey, this system is broken, it's wrong, we need to fix it. And like, as a history teacher, I can show all the times it's been let down. But more importantly, I love showing that because my big point for the students every year is, if nothing else, go vote. Because if we do nothing else, it's not going to change. And so that's why it's important to me to say, like, I'm your advocate. I'm here to make sure that I give you a voice. I make sure that I highlight people that look like you and the strength that they have done for our country. And I want you to take that and go with it, to go vote and go and make your voice heard. And the thing I talk to, like you mentioned about how young I am, I'm 29. And I look at them, I said, hey, your generation, Gen Z, and my generation, millennials, we're the up and coming, we're the future. If we want to change what the country looks like, we can do that. But we have to work together and to be able to move forward. And that's why I tell my students, we have to know the past so we can move to the future.
Absolutely. Do you feel like, though, could that be a burden too, having to advocate in that way? Or do you look at it as, no, not at all? So do you consider that a burden? Because I've asked oftentimes just some of my colleagues, how do you feel about that? Because on one hand, we're looking at everything that's going on, that's happened in our country, particularly over the last 4 years and where we are right now. It also can be a burden because you're right. People look at you and they automatically also make these assumptions until they get to know you. And so could that also be like a double-edged sword? I mean, what are your thoughts?
There are definitely times I'm very conscious of it where I want to make sure, because the way I look, I will sometimes maybe go a little bit more stressed of which way I go on that to be more clear, because I don't want to get misinterpreted just based on my looks, which goes back to that's the whole point of this podcast, right? Is to not get misinterpreted based on your looks, So I want to make sure, I wouldn't say it's not necessarily a burden, more so than it's just what's needed. I've had tons of conversations with friends and family over the past year or two, especially, where it's just, it's important to talk about these things because, let's go back even 10 years or so. I mean, a lot of white people aren't talking about race. They're not talking about the issues that are going on with for instance, like the immigration at the border. They just go in and talk about they're like, oh, we need to keep people from coming in. They never talk about, well, why are they coming over? And what can we do to help them why are they leaving their home to try to come over here? Instead of saying what can we do to help that? It's just, how can we keep them from coming? And so I think it's important that, because, most of history is white people looking the other way. Not my problem. I hope it gets better for you. I'll pray for you. And that's it. And it's but prayer is action too. So that's why I'd say it's important to do.
Mm-hmm.
What was your first aha moment as a teacher?
That's a good question.
LaDonna was convinced you'd have one. So if you don't, this is on her.
Oh, I got it's how to limit it.
Okay,
right?
There you go.
Okay, I'll give
so many good answers.
Let's see. I'll give two. One of them, I'd say at Vanston. So Vanston Middle School does a great job with a lot of different points. Melissa Smith, the principal there, is really great. One of the aha moments for me was going and just seeing Jennifer Borders. She was our band director at the time. She's now with us over at West, so I still get to be with her. Seeing what she could get the students to do. The same kid who I might have been having issues with that my first or second year of teaching, and seeing how they could do this. I'm a music person. I was a trumpet and all that, but they could do stuff in 8th grade that I was like, I couldn't do that till I was a sophomore. And then to see, if she can get them to do that, that means I'm not doing enough to set that kid up to have success. It comes back on me, I'd say that was one big aha moment, was seeing that. And also just, there's countless I could give about other teachers that were at Vanston, such as Maria Trevino over at doing math at the time. She's now over at Agnew. Or even Mark Wilburn, who doing science, and just seeing the things they could get the kids to do. And when you take the language barrier out of it, because we have about 60% of our kids were LEP, and you do just the basic, just the academics of without the language barrier, and they were just as smart as anyone. And so it showed me, it's hey, I got to work to make sure I can set them up for that. I'd say the other aha moment was just whenever you go and you create that class discussion, when you set them up to see two different perspectives and then have them debate those perspectives. That's a really fun moment as a teacher. You go, oh, I can set them up to get to the point I want them to get to. But if I set them up to lead to that, instead of me just handing it to them, it makes for a really fun day, And so I'd say those are probably my first two I could think of.
Wow. And, there's nothing like having an aha, right? Because you're like, oh, that actually works, right? And I want to definitely do that again. So when we talk about your why, because now you're about 6 years in. Okay, wow, which I'm so proud of you, I have to say. What is your why? What do you think your why was initially when you got into teaching, and then has it evolved to where you are today?
So it's a really good question. This is something that Karen Morris has really been intentional about also. My current principal over at West. I was also with her when she was with us at Vanston for a little bit. And she's been real intentional about your why. So I'd say for me, it's kind of going back to, we all want to make an impact in the world, and we all want to make a difference. We turn on TV and we see all the things going on. And the thing I love about our job is we get to have a direct influence every single day. If I see something, I can go and immediately say something about it the next day to the future leaders here of Mesquite, So I'd say my why is to make sure that I set that kid up to be everything they want to be. It's their choice from that point on of what business they want to have or what school they can go to. I want to make sure I set them up in the best possible situation. I've been thinking this for my whole career. Whenever I was a second-year teacher, I said, I want to be my second year, but I want to teach like it's my 10th. I'm in my 6th. I want to teach like it's my 30th. I want to kind of have that I wish I was that good now, so that help that kid, because I only get one chance with that kid,
So true.
It's tricky. It's the older you get, the more experience you have, but sometimes the enthusiasm level decreases.
Absolutely.
If you're able to maintain both through an entire career, you've really done something.
Mm-hmm.
You've mentioned you're broaching topics in your classroom, about race and inequity. And I know that one of the points of this podcast is to get people around the district talking about this, and specifically to get students feeling empowered to ask these types of questions or discuss these topics with their teachers and educators. Have you had some real specific conversations with some of your students about these different things we've seen happening in the world?
Very much. For the past 3 years, I'd probably say we've been more intentional about it than we were previously. We just would go, and it's like, for instance, we kind of go, and so I previously taught U.S. history from the beginning to Reconstruction. So right after Civil War, it's a terrible time to end, because you're like, you basically spend the whole class talking about slavery and pointing out the flaws of it. One thing that I made sure to do is I'd always show the positive and the negative of each president. It's 12 of our first 16 presidents owned slaves, which kind of helps highlight why slavery was so predominant for so long and why it was so hard for them to let it go, because that was what they based their whole livelihood off of. Whenever I point that out, so even with George Washington or Thomas Jefferson, you just kind of let it sit there for a little bit. And immediately, the first thing you need to do is ask a kid, how do you feel about that? How does that compare to what they've done? And does that change your opinion at all about them? And then, so it kind of makes them wrestle with that thought process. Or even now here lately, we'll go and we'll talk about, so my favorite president is FDR. And, I think he does amazing things. He does the New Deal. We talk about all that great stuff. But then I'll be like, wait a second. And I'll throw in the internment camps where they went and they forced Japanese Americans to, leave their homes to go and live in this internment camp during World War II. Mm-hmm. And I'll say, how does that make sense? If he's the same guy who does both these things, or I asked my AP kids recently, I said, with the New Deal, I pointed out how it only really helped white people, and minorities weren't able to have the same available resources with that. And I said, was it worth it? And then just hearing, their responses to that was, I think it just leads to that next level conversation that we want our kids to have regarding about this struggle that we have.
Absolutely. So let's talk about that, because we're about to put together an Emerging Leaders program. I don't know if you've heard about it, but this is going to be for every single student, high schooler in Mesquite ISD. And so it doesn't matter what school you attend. If you are a freshman or a sophomore beginning next year, then you will have the opportunity to join the Emerging Leaders program. And it is all about leadership. It's all about really looking at our leaders, past and present, and really gaining a high level of insight about who they were, what they were about, the things that they created, the great things that they did, but where were also the flaws, right? Because at the end of the day, we're also very much so human, right?
Right.
And so we're always coming from that very human perspective. I'm always really curious to talk and speak to history teachers and ask them, what are the leaders that you believe that our kids should be covering, both past and present?
That's a big question. I think, real quick, that's part of the issue we have with the statues. If you make a statue of a single man, there's only been one perfect man, and it's none of them.
That's
so,
right.
We all have our own sins and flaws. And so that's where we run into it is you can't make a statue of anybody because, we all have our flaw. That's why, personally, I think it'd be better if we made it over like ideas or groups of
Interesting.
people, because then you could kind of say overall, this is the point.
Okay.
Right. But for individuals, one thing I do is I do rank the presidents for my AP kids and my so now, by the way, I don't think I mentioned this earlier. I now teach high school, and so I teach from starts in the Reconstruction, goes all the way current day.
Mm-hmm.
So much more fun of a class. I really love both, but easier for kids to grasp. And there's also good things that happen to everybody, so it's good. But I would say those leaders that you want to gravitate to are definitely the ones that ultimately did the most good for the most people. So Dr. King is, the more I've studied him, the more I'm thinking he might be my favorite American. He just did so much in just such a strong way that I personally really identify with. I love the way he goes and directly quotes the Bible a lot of the times. He said, Jesus said this, like, love the sojourner. So why are we not doing that? And also just like all those different points. I'd say someone like that, FDR, Eleanor Roosevelt, but even like Cesar Chavez, he also is really great to go and give it as an example. So I think it's just important to see because that's what we're all about, is who had the biggest impact on the most people. And that's really the people that you want to emulate.
Absolutely.
It's so important to understand humans, to realize there's so much gray area, both in people and in anything, any topic, any issue. And we are in a very zero-sum climate right now.
Yes.
You're either here or you're against it. And that's dangerous because it just doesn't allow for any complex thought. It's a yes or no, right or wrong world in your view. I want to ask you, because you can't say I rank the presidents and then not rank the presidents. So can you give us a top 5, bottom 5?
That's what I do. Top 5, I have FDR. Let's see, I'm trying to think of the order I have them to. Abraham Lincoln. I do LBJ/JFK.
Okay.
Because I thought
Same administration?
Right, because like the JFK, after he gets assassinated, LBJ finishes the job.
He does.
And so I thought I kind of put them together.
Okay.
So I cheat a little bit.
I'll accept that.
And then I also have Teddy Roosevelt, like him a whole lot too. And it's kind of hard to figure out. Like then there's kind of like a little bit of a drop off.
You
after
can go
that.
a little longer just to, we allow nuance here, right? We just talked about that.
And then with the bottom 5, I'd say it goes with Andrew Johnson. He was he was the first guy to get impeached, and he was right after Lincoln, and so a lot of Reconstruction got messed up because of him. So we could be a lot further along. I'd also put Nixon in there. There's a lot of issues that we have today that are influenced by him. And there's kind of like the rest of them are all probably somewhere around those kind of guys. So
let's talk about moving forward, because of course, the one thing that I feel like our country has right now is just a level of excitement. We're coming out of COVID. We're coming out of some really critical things that we've had going on. And we're moving, forward and just trying to kind of reclaim, in some essence, the life that we've had, right, in the past and be able to do those things. But what would you like to see our students do for the community overall, and then, of course, for our country? So when we talk about students, what do you think that they should be thinking about, and what should they be doing right now to help move our country forward?
Let's see. It's such a big question. I think the biggest thing that I want them to think about is I want them to think about what can they do. Because a lot of times, especially teenagers, they feel like they're just now starting to get some responsibility, but they feel like they don't have a say on things. So I want them to start having those thoughts about what can I do, and then moving forward, what would I like to see? I know that as they go to like junior and senior year, they're really set up well to be able to analyze politics. I know I keep coming back to politics, but it's also the thing that people like to say they don't like to talk about politics or that they're non-political, but it affects all your life, especially local politics. So I'd like to be able to help our kids be able to see like who they're like, who is the best advocate for them and stands more for what they believe in, and how they can, try to set them up more in those regards. But as far as like for COVID and whatnot, I think I do just want to give a short shout out to, so I'll give another shout out to my principal, Karen Morris. She's handled it phenomenally. She's done such a great job making sure that all of our students stay masked every day, and that just going through all the protocols that we can. She's been following CDC to the letter. And like I mentioned at the beginning, that my wife has cystic fibrosis, so we were very stressed out through all this, and just really, really challenging. But Karen was just great throughout the whole process. And then I think I'd be remiss if I didn't mention students have handled it the best. They get it. I'd go and I shared about my wife, and that's why, that's why I'm so intense at times. And they go, they've been great. Whole year, never had an issue with masks or distancing or anything. I mean, they really do care a lot about us, and they care a lot about being able to see their friends and taking care of them. Like, they get it. So I think that this generation of kids is definitely very empathetic. And I think that's probably the best thing that we could do for them.
Yeah, well, I hadn't even thought about that. But what COVID maybe will give to this generation as opposed to what it's taken away.
Yeah.
It's a level of empathy that maybe all our generations didn't have.
I agree. I definitely agree with that. That's exceptional.
I've got elementary school kids, and once they started wearing the mask, they didn't complain. And kids are just so malleable, right?
They are.
They're flexible. They can adjust to a lot of things better than adults can.
Absolutely. In fact, they want to help.
You get.
Yeah, they're like, is this going to help? Let me do it.
I mean, my daughter will sometimes forget she's got it on in the car, or we're going to go to Target, and she'll put it on in the car before we even get there. And I'm waiting until we walk in the door before I'm putting mine on.
Right.
All right, can you hang around for a few minutes?
Yeah,
because I think I like this now. We've got the new segment called Let's Ask a Question, but I like our guests being involved with that. So if you've got something to pipe in. And before that, let me give you, if you're listening and you have a question, you can email us at letstalk@mesquiteisd.org, or you can reach out to us on social media. Just search for Let MISD, and you can reach out to us that way. So what do we have this week?
So this week we have I think it's a great question. As a society, we have learned to hold biases against gender, race, and many other categories that define a person. The issue of communicating age seems to me that it is still held captive as something that is the best kept private. Wow. Well, we've already excluded that one, right? As we fight bias in hiring and in other areas based on age, what are your thoughts on this matter?
Well, we talked to Dr. Rivera last week and his experience in Korea, and we know this about that culture is they revere the elderly. We sometimes don't.
No,
and
we
so
don't.
That's part of it. And it's impolite for me to ask you your age.
And it
and
is.
Vice versa.
I agree. But I would tell you that, to be honest with you, I would tell anyone, embrace it. Embrace it. It says so much about who you are, but it also speaks to your experiences. So I am listening, of course, to our guest today and thinking like, wow, he is only 29 years old. How amazing is that? His level of insight and just thinking and considering is just amazing. So I am just so excited to meet him. But the other part of that, when I think about myself and my own experience, being a 51-year-old African-American woman, that to me says, wow, you've gone through some stuff. You've had some experiences that I can identify with. And I think that it really it makes us really think about people differently. It really allows us to say, okay, hey, I hadn't thought about that, The other part of that is that it's so funny. People think you're a lot younger or older until you tell them how old you are, right? And so I think that it always lies and gives us a little bit more perspective. So that's my thought. Well, I
think he brings up a good point. I mean, that is something that is still taboo to some degree, to a large degree.
Yes.
And so we do challenge our guests when they come in here.
Yes.
We don't force it. As Mary Randall said in episode 3. I'm a mature Black lady. So we don't force it, but everybody else has embraced it as part of the positioning statement. I'm 47 and I'm white. And, 29 and white, 51 and a Black woman. And if we're going to broach topics and we're going to talk about things and we're going to encourage openness, that's another part about being open.
Well, it's a level of transparency too. So when you really think about it, you're like, you know what? Wow, they were brave enough to share with me how old they are. And I don't even think there's really bravery. I think we should get more comfortable as Americans in terms of embracing all of who we are, right? Because that's really what makes us great. It's really the ability to embrace someone. It doesn't matter who they are, what they look like, how old they are. You can really just embrace that and accept that and get to know the person for who they are. So,
And I think y'all have done a great job of this throughout the podcast, because you guys often mention about we only have the perspective that we have. And so, I don't know what it's like to be 50 yet, I don't know what it's like, the struggles and the good things of being, the next age, or even, looking back at being, 16. It's hard sometimes to hear what they're going through. So I agree. I think it definitely gives a different perspective, and it's important to have that different voice in the room.
When do you turn 30?
October.
Okay. I remember I've got a twin brother, and when we turned 30, he sent me a birthday card and said, here are our options. Turn 30 or be dead. I was like, okay. So ever since, that's kind of how I look at it. It beats the alternative.
That's right.
If you think you're too old, it beats the alternative.
Absolutely. So yeah, great question. We really appreciate that from one of our wonderful listeners. And I would say, listeners, please don't forget, send us an email. We want your questions. We want to be able to talk to you about race, about gender, about age, whatever you feel like you want to discuss and have us talk about. We want to be able to talk about that too. So
That's
hey,
right.
Let's talk, right?
That's exactly right. Let's talk at mesquiteisd.org. That's our show for the week. If you are enjoying the conversation, please let a friend know so we can continue reaching more people. And be sure to follow us on social media by using the search term LetMISD. For Dr. LaDonna Gully, for Eric Grant, history teacher at West Mesquite, I'm Ted Madden. Let's talk again next week.